Okay, so we're going to be talking about the nature of God. Now, my first question for you guys is, what's God's nature? I'm kidding, no, I'll be doing that talk. But why do you think this matters? Why should we talk about what God's nature is in this? Oh, that's not mine. Why do you think we need to talk about God's nature in this philosophical or heady theological way? Any thoughts? Maybe we don't. I don't know. Maybe I should just get down. So, I'll give you 3 reasons. First, which God are we talking about? Devin mentioned this in his talk a couple weeks ago, but we have a few new faces, so I'll kind of repeat what he said. The Mormon God and the classical Christian God are very different. Are we talking about the immaterial spiritual being who is timeless and who is responsible for all of creation? Or are we talking about some guy who lived on a planet somewhere, who was born and who was made a god by his own God? So there are some wildly differing views on what God's nature is. It's important to know which one we believe and to be able to distinguish between what people mean when they say God. Second, our knowledge of God's nature informs our relationship with Him. There was a man named Rabbi Kushner who believed that because evil exists in the world, God must not be all-powerful, otherwise he would have wiped out all the evil in the world. He came to accept this after, what was it? Was his son died? Yeah, his son died, and he decided, I need to forgive God for failing to keep my son alive. Now, that's just one example where our theology has a huge impact on our relationship with God, and in fact on every aspect of Christianity. Third, God's just really great, guys. I mean, I think he's pretty cool. I think his nature is pretty awesome and far above our ability to understand, but it glorifies him when we are in awe of how awesome he is. So when we talk about what the nature of something is, we're sort of just describing what is this thing in its essential properties. So we'll be talking about different attributes of God. Now, an attribute is not just anything that you can say about God. An attribute is specifically an intrinsic characteristic of God. To contrast that, there are also extrinsic characteristics of God. Intrinsic means that's part of God's own being. Extrinsic means it's part of something outside of him. So for example, God, say God being good would be an extrinsic property. No, sorry, intrinsic property. Don't listen to me. So that's something about God's own being that we're talking about here. Whereas God being a creator is an extrinsic property. That's not saying that, there's something in God that changes when he becomes a creator. That's just saying that he did something, now there's a creation. So God doesn't have to change himself in order to become a creator, so that would be considered an extrinsic property. It's not having to do with any change in his being. So I'm going to start off by, can you guys see that all right? Is it kind of,
yeah.
Cool, okay. So I'm going to start off by defining some important terms that we use talking about God's attributes. Have you guys heard communicable and incommunicable before? Yeah, okay. So communicable attributes are attributes that can be communicated or transferred to a creature. So God creates us with, say existence. He gives us some sort of existence. That's something God has that he can give to us in some way. He also gives us, let's say knowledge or intelligence. He creates us with intelligent minds. This is another attribute that God has himself that he gives to creatures. In contrast, there are also incommunicable attributes of God. Now, that means that these are things that God does not give to the creatures he creates. So, can you guys think of any examples of that? Yeah? Yeah. God doesn't give us all the power. It'd be in a terrible place if we did. I mean, I would have probably all the pizza in the room right now if I had all the power. I mean, I don't think you guys would be happy with that. So, that's a good example. Another one is, let's say, eternality or being uncreated. Can God create creatures with the attribute of being uncreated? I mean, not really, because if he did that, they'd be created. So when we are speaking about God, we can speak in basically three different ways, and this is the same for anything. So these three words here have to do with how we apply concepts to the things that we're talking about. It's not limited to theology, though. So when we're speaking univocally, that means when we use some concept, say, like, I don't know, I'll go back to goodness. That means when we're saying something is good and some other thing is good, we mean goodness in the exact same way. If we're speaking univocally, that's one, or uni, and vocal voice. It's like you're saying the same thing. We could also speak analogically, which is where the meaning is slightly different. We might say that this is a good soda and Devin's a good teacher. But when we're saying that both of these things are good, we don't mean quite the same thing. The soda isn't good because it explained things really well, and Devin isn't a great teacher because he tastes like orange. Now, what? Okay.
More like chocolate.
All right, cool. We could also speak equivocally. That means things have a completely different meaning. So you'll hear that in sarcasm. I'll say, man, it's such a beautiful day today. And you look outside and it's snowing and it's more like sleet outside. It's foggy. You can't really see anything. You're like, man, no, it's not. So yeah. Now, which of these three do you think that we would want to speak of God in? Like, can you guys, which would you rather be able to speak of God in? Votes for univocal? All right. Votes for analogical? No one? How about equivocal? Yeah. No one really goes for equivocal. People don't really think about that one. So here's the problem when we start talking about God, though. So to kind of illustrate this, I'm going to go back to what I was talking about with the good soda versus the good teacher. Now, the reason that we can't speak of these things univocally when we're saying good is because they have qualitative differences to them. Now, if we were to speak of things univocally, then, well, it could allow for differences in degree of goodness, like maybe this soda could be better than another soda, but it doesn't allow for different kinds of goodness. So similarly to that, let's look at an attribute like, what's a good one? Let's take existence. Now, if we suppose that Christian theism is true and God has always existed and everything exists in him, don't know if everyone here is a Christian, I think not, then would our existence be the same kind as his? I mean, we have our existence through something that causes us to exist, whereas God is the cause of everything else's existence. So we would look at that and say, if we say we exist and God exists, this can't mean the same kind of thing. It's not as if God exists more than we do. He has a different sort of existence. It's slightly different. There's an element of similarity there, just as this soda is good and so is Devin's teaching. But it's not the exact same, which is why we say it's analogical. Now, what we'll find is a lot of these attributes have things that we kind of understand through the world around us, that we see, okay, I kind of know what goodness is. I mean, this soda's good, Devin's a good teacher, I know some good people. So we learn about these concepts through creation. We'll experience things and we'll see, man, this thing seems like goodness. And we kind of get this idea of goodness formed in our head. But here's the problem. We're learning all of these concepts through created and finite things, not directly from an infinite, uncreated being. So often our concepts have these elements of finitude and things that are contingent or dependent on something else for their existence, kind of woven in with them. So that's where speaking analogically comes into play. So if we want to speak analogically, what we'll do is we'll start with some univocal concept, just like goodness with, what's this, soda? Soda and the teacher, goodness doesn't mean the exact same thing in both cases, but it's still saying, like, yeah, there's something good about both of these. So there's an element of similarity here, and this is what we start with. Because when we say that, I don't know, God exists, it's not entirely different from our existence. It still means, well, God's real. That's what we mean by that. The same way we would say that, well, we're real. Well, no, not the same way, but there's similarity there. But because what we know, or the way we form concepts is from these created things, we have to take a look at the way our concepts have these elements of finitude sort of woven into it, and we have to kind of weed those out. So that's what I mean by negating these aspects. So here's another example. God knows things, and we also believe that God is outside of time. So we know things by sense experience or by thinking through things in a process. Now, neither of those work if you don't exist in time. So God's knowledge of things isn't like he's looking outside of himself and says, oh, look, there's some stuff. I kind of can see things about that stuff, so I'm going to abstract some concept from that and kind of think about it this way. Because God isn't a physical being and he's not in time. It's not like there's new information coming to him. So these are aspects of knowledge that are limited to finite creatures. So we would say God knows things, but not through sense experience and not by some process of thought. But instead, he would have to know things just from his own being. That's the only thing left. It's not from a thought process or by sense experience, so it's probably something that's just intrinsic to God. And then, since we're talking about an infinite being, then all of his attributes are going to be infinitely greater than ours. So we magnify this concept to its maximal extent. Have a little example here. So God is good. We have some concept of goodness through creation. Unlike created things, God's goodness is not based on how he measured up to some end. And by end here, I don't mean like the end of a line. I mean an end goal. Teleological is a word that describes the end goal of something, but that was too big for this slide. So he has no obligations to follow because nothing's over God. Rather, he is what goodness is. So since God is substantial goodness, there can be no lack of goodness in him. He is more than just really good. He is complete, perfect goodness. So I kind of skipped ahead talking about some of God's attributes here, but I wanted to give an example of what this analogical speaking kind of looks like. So now we're going to get started. So simplicity is not saying, oh, well, God makes sense. He's just not very complicated. Ironically, simplicity is probably the most complicated, well, no, it's up there with the Trinity as one of the most complicated things that I've ever heard about God. So what that means is God is not composed of parts in any way. Now, to give some background on this, I'll have to explain a little bit about Aquinas' notions of essence and existence. So some of you who have been here with us a little longer will have heard the Kalam cosmological argument. Now, that's whatever begins to exist has a cause, and the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. So when we explain this, we probably went back to explaining the concepts of act and potency. So these were concepts that Aristotle had formulated, trying to explain sort of causal relationships between things and the account of their being. So act, to Aristotle, meant reality. It's the same thing as actuality in his mind. If something is actual, then it's real. And potency, in his mind, was the capacity to have actuality, or the capacity to be real. One way I've heard it explained was, I'm skipping steps. Hold on. Okay. So let's say I have a child. Well, I don't have a child right now, but I might have the capacity to have that child. So there is possibly some potential existence for a child. That child would actually exist if I were to have a family. Then it would be an actual child. So in created things, we have this level of potency in us. Now, that doesn't mean the same thing as power. Potency can mean the ability to do things in one sense, but in the sense we're speaking of, it means the capacity for becoming actual. That's important to kind of make that distinction here, because we aren't talking about the ability to do stuff. So for creatures, we're changing. We have capacity for change. Now that means that some things that well, here's an example. Let's say when we were born, we can't really talk, and our minds aren't really well developed. So at that point, we have potential for having developed brains and thinking intelligently, but it wasn't actual. So as we grow in our intelligence, then we're actualizing that potential that existed before. So to bring this back to this topic, Aquinas kind of interpreted Aristotle's notions differently and changed them a little bit. He rephrased something's potential as its essence or its nature. So what that means is, let's say we have a horse. So a horse could be certain things, but not others. A horse isn't going to grow wings, and it's not going to learn to speak English. So horses have, let's say, this set of potential things that can be actualized in it that is unique to a horse. Like a horse could have the ability to run fast, or to have a long, wavy tail. I don't know, regular horse things. Now, one way I've heard it explained is the potential or the essence of a creature is sort of like a balloon that hasn't been inflated yet. The balloon, I mean, it's not like you have a whole balloon here. It's still just like deflated. Similarly, a potential by itself isn't a being. It needs actuality for it to exist. But the potential of that being, or its essence, kind of determines what it will be. So if you take this balloon and start blowing it up, then the air will sort of fill up the balloon up to the shape of the balloon that it was going to be in. Like if you have I don't know, one of those ones they use for blowing animals, it'll be long, and if you have a regular one, it'll be a bulb. So you can think of its essence as sort of shaping the air or the existence that fills it. And you can think of the actuality or the existence of something as filling up its essence. So let's take, let's look at Devin, for example. You're getting your master's in apologetics, right? Okay, so Devin has some potential to expand his brain to unlock the mysteries of God, right? Now, where is that knowledge coming from? I mean, he's learning it from his teachers, right? So he has this potential to receive this knowledge, and it's being filled in as he's being taught from someone who already has that knowledge. Now, Aquinas thought it was a similar thing with existence. The boring metaphysical stuff is going to diminish, but it'll kind of be there throughout the whole thing, so sorry about that. Now, he thought, okay, so things have potential or some essence that needs to be filled with existence. Filled is kind of a metaphor here. And he thinks, okay, that has to come from something that actually exists. Otherwise, you have something that doesn't exist causing something. Doesn't really work, right? I mean, I wish it did. I'd like some free stuff that just pops out of nowhere. So he also thought, okay, well, this can't go on forever. And here's why. So I know that I was caused to exist by something else. And so are my parents and their parents and so on. Now, can that go on forever? What do you guys think? Possible? Not possible? So here's an example of that. Suppose I had a chain here. I don't actually have a chain. If I did, I would have brought it. It would have been fun. But let's say I decide, oh, did I bump that? Oops. So let's say I decide I'm going to pick this chain up and I'm going to lift it up high. Now, you would see at the bottom, if this wasn't a very long chain, that the bottom chain would be hanging up and it would be suspended by the chain above it. So it's sort of like this bottom link is being held by the link above it, which is being held by the link above that one, and so on. Now, that makes sense to us. Well, it makes a little more sense when we think of it something physically. So we can see that each link is being held up by something above it, just how, well, each event in the physical world is caused by something else. So like, we know where this came from, we know where we came from. But let's suppose that that chain of events did go on forever. So instead of me reaching down and pulling this chain up and holding it up there, suppose you only see the end of the chain and it's moving upward and you can't see anything pulling it at all. Now, if the chain is going back infinitely, hypothetically, like it would be if there was this infinite regress of causes, then we run into a problem because there's not actually anything lifting that chain up. Have you ever seen two links on a chain lift each other up? No one? Okay, thought so. If you do, then dude, take a video. I want to see that. So Aquinas thinks, well, something similar would have to be the case for beings coming into existence. If there isn't some first mover that causes this chain to lift up, then there's nothing to support it. Like, we can see the chain has some support if I were holding it here because, well, I'm grounded and I have the ability to lift things up. I have the force that can do that. And that's something that the chain links don't have. So what he thinks is there has to be something that has existence but doesn't require its existence from anything else. Now, that means something really interesting for that being's essence. As I said before, the essence of a being has to do with whatever it could potentially be. It has to do with the capacity for things to be actualized in it. Now, if this being that Aquinas called the first mover, or the unmoved mover, has existence from itself, then it doesn't really work out if this being also has some potentiality, because that means it would be lacking some existence that it would have to get from something outside of itself. But if there isn't anything outside of itself to give it existence, then you have a contradiction there. So he decided, well, it can't have an essence that is distinct from its existence. And this is really confusing, and I could easily spend all night talking about this and blabbering. So if you have questions about this, save it for the end or Thursday. Otherwise, I'll take questions throughout. So he decided, well, this being's existence and its essence have to be linked together. So he would say they aren't composed of its existence and essence like created things are. Now, the opposite of a composite thing is a simple thing. That doesn't mean, again, that, oh, it makes sense or it's easy to understand. It's quite the opposite. It means that he isn't made of parts. So this is why I said God's essence is existence, so he is not made up of metaphysical parts. So do you guys think this is an incommunicable or a communicable attribute? Incommunicable. Yeah, I got plenty of parts. See this? Fingers. All right. So I'm going to move on from here. This one is weird and confusing, but you'll see it's kind of important for everything else. Here we got a fancy Latin word, aseity. Do you know how to pronounce Latin, Pastor Ware? Do you know how to pronounce this? I want to say it's aseity. I don't know. Aseity. Okay, sure. Pastor Ware says it's aseity. So this is something we get from...
Take it like you know it, man.
Hey, good advice.
And everyone will go with you.
So this attribute is derived from simplicity. A means from and se means oneself. So this means its existence is from itself, which I mentioned before. So if God gets his existence from himself, then we would say he is self-existent. And, well, if he's self-existent, then, well, it seems like that would imply he has always existed. He's not dependent on anything else for his existence. So here we have some scripture on the right. Can one of you guys read one of these? Any takers? Yeah, Scarlett.
God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you.
So he identifies himself as just, I am. It's like, oh boy, that's pretty heavy. Now, some people might think, oh, we're reading our philosophy into our theology here. But God's self-existence is kind of evident throughout Scripture. Even in creation, God existed before time, and it says he was there from the beginning. And Revelation 1:8, someone want to read that? I can't really see it from here.
I am the Alpha and the Omega, says the Lord God, who is and who was and who is to come, the Almighty.
So here we have Jesus saying that he's eternal. So this is, I might have put eternality as a separate thing here. Did I do that? I did. All right, I'm going to skip up to here. So this means God does not exist in time. He's not a temporal being. If God's existence is from himself, or God is self-existent, then it's not like he has a beginning point. And also, since we've kind of learned that time and space are linked together, if God is prior to the physical universe, and he's also prior to the beginning of time. So this would mean God is not a temporal being. So here I have Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So he is the creator of all of space and time. So he's not part of either of those. And John 8:58. Can someone read those? I can crane my neck around. So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was born, I am." Now, this is crazy. So before we had I am just being used as a name, but here Jesus is using it sort of in the place of I was. It's like he has this present tense being used to describe his existence in the past. It has this like sort of implication of timelessness in it. It's like, okay, Jesus, that's crazy. I think it's awesome. So with each of these, I want to show kind of where we can see this in philosophy and also where we can see it in Scripture, because I think there's a lot of overlap here. Now I'm going to move on from here. So I'm going to talk about God's perfection a little bit. So by that, I don't just mean, oh, God's really good. So for Aquinas, perfection meant something like a completeness of being. His idea was, well, let's say something has its potential completely filled. And that thing is all that it could be. It's complete. And that's what perfection means. A synonym is completeness. Now, if God is pure being, which is what simplicity implies, then, well, God would have no lack of anything. This is what privations mean. It comes from the same root as deprived, meaning you're lacking something. So God cannot lack anything. Where would the thing that he was lacking come from? I mean, if he is God, he's the source of all things, so he must have like complete being with no lack in him whatsoever. So that implies, hey Scarlett.
What's an example of something God, or like we lack that God can't lack? Just to.
Well, let's say power. We don't have all the power. There are lots of things that we can't do. We have limitations in that way. God's being is not limited. What would God's being be limited by if he is like the first mover of all things? If he's not dependent on anything, then what could limit him, right? There's also, let's say, moral goodness. Our moral goodness is kind of lacking. But there are also these incommunicable attributes that we just don't have any of it. We aren't simple in the sense that God is. We aren't eternal at all. Well, I mean, we might last forever if our souls go on, but we have a beginning, is what I mean. And we aren't uncreated. We don't exist from ourselves. These are sort of privations that we have just qualitatively, not from degrees. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Cool. So I was going to ask if this was communicable or incommunicable, but that seems like a tricky one. What do you guys think? Any takers on communicable? Any on incommunicable?
Well, I feel like to be in heaven, though. But we're talking about purity and perfection, or?
I'm talking about this idea of complete being. So I'm not sure, and here's why. Because God gives us certain perfections, but not in, he gives us certain qualities that are perfections, but he doesn't give us in complete amounts. So I'm not certain about this. That would be something that I'd like to look into. I don't know if God giving us goodness, which is a perfection, but in lesser degrees, would count as communicating a perfection. I don't know. I'm not faking it till I make it. I'm sorry, Pastor Ware. So now we're going to talk about God's immutability. So that has the same root word as mutation, or which it has to do with change. So this means God does not change. So I'll say here, this is also derived from simplicity. Simplicity kind of has to do with every other doctrine of God, which is why I said it was important. So does someone want to read Psalm 102? Okay.
Even they will perish, but you endure, and all of them will wear out like a garment. Like clothing, you will change them, and they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will not come to an end.
And Malachi 3:6? Okay.
For I, the Lord, do not change. Therefore you, O sons of Jacob, are not consumed.
So Scripture says a lot about God's sort of constancy. He is faithful. He is going to be like always the same. And so what do you guys think this means? Like God doesn't change? Because some people have said, oh, God isn't able to change, therefore he's not all-powerful. Or he can't relate to changing beings then. You guys have any thoughts?
If you consider God as the peak of perfection, the peak of all things, and there's nothing that can be changed unless you were diminishing or decreasing. So
Yeah, that's a good one.
there's no age, there's no changing of view, there's no any of that unless we'll be stepping away from being God.
Yeah. So if we say, Scarlett.
I wanted to add in there, like, with identity, like, we constantly change when it comes to our self-identity. Like, you're not who you are when you're 20, when you are when you're 50. You change a lot as a person, you know. God never changes because he's an eternal being, and like you said, he doesn't have potential because he's already fulfilled. Like, he can't grow and get to be a better person or learn more or anything like that.
Right. So here's actually, I'll talk about the omnipotence thing when we get to that. But God not being able to improve himself doesn't mean that he's lacking something. Rather, it means the opposite. If he were able to improve, that would mean that he was lacking something, that he could get something that he didn't have already. All right. So this next one is similar to immutability. And this one is a little more controversial and not very well understood. Impassibility essentially means that God is not affected by creatures and he doesn't do things in a reactionary way. Now, a lot of people will hear that and think, oh, God doesn't have emotions and God doesn't care about people. But that's not what this means. So can someone read Job 35, a big passage?
Look at the heavens and see, and behold the clouds, they are higher than you. If you have sinned, what do you accomplish against him? And if your transgressions are many, what do you do? If you are righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness is for a man like yourself, and your righteousness is for a son of man.
I'm going to start passing out candy to people who read. Look, good in her head.
You're better than me. I just call on people.
All right. I'm grabbing you guys. Don't report me. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll hand out candy then too.
Probably a good idea.
Maybe. I mean, I think this is awesome. We get this image of God being hurt by our sin or by, I don't know, like we do something wrong and then he's up there crying. This passage from Job is saying God's not like that. He's saying that God is fine. Like, we can't hurt him. Our sin, he hates it. But he's going to be okay. You can't ruin God's day by, I don't know, telling a lie. That doesn't mean God's okay with sin, and he doesn't mean he doesn't care if you sin. But what it does mean is that he is no less, what's the word? He is unchanging, and he's not going to be moved by our own shortcomings. Even while we're falling short, he is constant. And I think that's an awesome thing. So, can someone read Luke 13 at the bottom there? I don't know if you can all see that.
Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills prophets and stones those sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together just as a hen gathers a brood under her wings, and you would not have it.
Keep going.
No,
Okay. So, this seems like it's saying something different. Jesus is having this response to Jerusalem, or reacting toward them. So here's where some doctrine about the Trinity comes in. That's going to be Devin's talk next week. I don't want to steal his thunder too much. But what time do we have? Give me a second. Okay, we're good. Now, Jesus has two natures, right? He has a divine nature and a human nature. It's the divine nature that is impassible, not the human nature. Jesus suffered and had emotional changes, and like he wept in the garden. He underwent change in his human nature. So the reason I put this here is to show you that how Jesus' human nature reveals some characteristics about him as a person that doesn't apply directly to the divine nature, but it sort of shows us God's character. Because people will hear impassibility and they'll think, oh, well, God doesn't care if we do things, or he just is indifferent. Jesus' reaction shows us that he is, in his human nature, he's deeply moved by Jerusalem's rejection of him. He says that he wanted to gather his brood under his wings like a hen. So Jesus' reaction toward Jerusalem in his human nature shows us something about his character in the divine nature. So God isn't being moved to tears and weeping over our sin in the divine nature, but he also isn't indifferent. We have something analogous to Jesus' response here. So what we see is God has something sort of analogous to human emotion, but it isn't in emotional states or changes in his being. Rather, it's in his will toward people, like toward Jerusalem. God's will for Jerusalem is for them to be united to him. And this is the will that he is expressing here. So he cares about this because his will is for Jerusalem's good. So I wanted to show that here to clarify what impassibility means. You guys have any thoughts on this? No?
Kind of confusing.
It is. Like, tell me more.
Because I don't know. It's like easy to like when God react. Well, I guess technically would be reacting to saying God like doesn't react in the same way we think of reactions, but in the Old Testament, whenever the Israelites disobey, for instance, and he punishes them because he becomes, I mean, I don't know if it says he becomes angry with them, but something to that extent where he's,
Yeah, that's a good point.
very not happy with them.
So, Scripture speaks of God anthropomorphically a lot. He says that his eyes go to and fro, or he calls him a father. Now, I think it does that a lot of times to just help us to understand, because, like I said before, we get our understanding of things through the world around us. So he speaks to us in terms of that to kind of portray what's going on in a way that we can grasp. So it is true that God hates sin. You know, that isn't an emotional state, that is an act of his will. And that is something that God does. So when we see God is angry at something or something pleases God, what that's telling us is something about God's will, not about his mood right now.
That makes more sense.
Now, you did bring up another thing. I don't know if this was your main point, but Israel disobeys and then God punishes them. Is that not God reacting to things? What do you guys think?
It's him reacting, but not out of emotion. Like he's a just God, and so he's
Right.
going to act in a just way.
So I'm going to give you a little pushback here. Now, if God were reacting to something, then that would sort of imply he's getting some new information. Like when I mentioned his knowledge before. God isn't saying, oh, look, Israel did this? Huh, okay. God had the knowledge of Israel's choices long before they even existed. And his will was to punish evil even though like it hadn't happened yet. Like he had this knowledge of things sort of prior to their creation, not out of sense knowledge. It's not like he's receiving information and acting upon it, but rather he creates things and knows his creation through himself as a creator. He sustains all things continuously. This is another thing that I could have put up here but didn't. I wish I did now. So just by virtue of his sustaining existence, and he already knows all things and doesn't need to do things in a reactionary manner, but rather his actions are active but not passive. Now, I mean, actions are active. That sounds like a kind of obvious, but what it means is it's not responsive. God isn't waiting for things to happen and then acts on it. He is the first mover, sort of. Devin, stop me if I mess up. Cool. All right. Cool. Any thoughts on that? I mean, it's a weird one to try and wrap your head around. It's like the idea of something existing timelessly and not acquiring information through the senses is kind of foreign to us. Can we move on? We all good? Okay. Did that one. Okay, omnipotence. So, I got a question for you guys. Can God microwave a Hot Pocket so hot that he can't eat it? Yeah? No? I don't know. So, if you can't, is he not omnipotent? It seems like that's something God can't do.
Yeah, but he can't, that's like saying, can he make a rock so heavy he can't lift it, because against the nature of who he is and where he is, he'd be creating something that's more than he is. If it's a pocket that's too hot to eat.
So God can't do things against his nature then?
Correct.
Okay. So it seems omnipotence is not just whatever you can name, God will do. God acts in accordance to his nature, as all things do. Like humans don't fly because we aren't that kind of thing. Now, well, I don't know. That is sort of, maybe that means we're not powerful in that sense. I don't know. But for God, if God is not able to, I don't know, let's say tell a lie, is he any less of that or from that? Because some people will say, yeah, there's something that God doesn't have the power to do, so his power is limited. How would you guys respond? What do you think about this? It's not quite the same as the Hot Pocket thing, because that ends up being sort of a contradiction. But what about God lying? Is that also a contradiction, or is there something else going on? Rebecca?
I already said that, like, he can't do anything, like, that's illogical. So, like, lying would be a sin, and God can't sin because God is perfect, so it's not logical for him to be able to lie.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah. I would also say he's not less powerful for not being able to lie. What is limiting God's power in saying that he doesn't lie? It's saying that he is truthful, and I think truthful is a positive thing. It's better to be truthful than not to be truthful. Yeah.
I would add that, like, lying or any evil is coming out of not being able to do something on your own. So, like, well, okay, lying is, like, kind of more specific to that. So, like, you usually have to lie to get your way or to get out of trouble or something like that. And God is, like, he has all the power, so he doesn't need to do that.
Yeah. Here's another thing I bring up related to what you said. God has no privations. There's nothing that he lacks. Now, that also includes moral attributes. God is truthful, and he is truthful to the maximal extent. In fact, he is truth. That's what Jesus said. He is the way, the truth, and the life. So his own power in just like his immense perfection is what prevents him from doing these things that are lesser, sort of. Now, anyone want to read Psalm 147 for me?
Great is our Lord and abundant in strength. His understanding is infinite.
Airhead?
I'm good.
Okay. Oh, you don't like airheads? Okay. How about Job 40?
Will the fault finder contend with the Almighty? Let him who reproves God answer it. Or do you have an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his?
Half of the attributes that I was looking for have verses in Job. Job is just God like going, hey, look at all this stuff that I'm doing, and who are you, man, to compare yourself? It's like, it's awesome. Revelation, anyone? All right, I can do that one. Alleluia, for the Lord God omnipotent reigns. omnipotent there is coming from translations that use the Latin versions. Not all Bibles will use that word, but if it's based on Latin text, it will, I believe. So you'll find verses about this all over. And God is called Almighty really frequently. That's one of his names. So we talked a little about the objections to this. So here I've got a question. So one of you mentioned that, it was you, right? Yeah, you mentioned that, okay, God's omnipotence is an example of an attribute that's incommunicable. That's true. So how do we talk about power then, analogically? So we have some concept of what power means. It's like the ability to do things. Would anyone like to try and explain God's omnipotence analogically? What do you guys think?
Can you repeat the question?
Okay, how about, so we're talking about God's omnipotence. And I want to ask, how do you describe God's omnipotence using analogous language? So we have some concept of what power means, and like we have the ability to do things. So what aspects of our ability to do things are specific to being finite or created? Any thoughts there?
Having enough muscle.
Yeah. So our ability to do things comes from, like, I don't know, comes from physical things that aren't, like, I don't know if they're intrinsic to us, but yeah, we're dependent on other things for our abilities. Cody?
We're also dependent on, there are other people who are higher than us in power that we have to get permission to do certain things, but God, he is the ultimate source and peak of power, so there is no one he would need permission from to create the universe, create us, or do anything else.
Right. So combining what you and Scarlett said, we have this idea where we're relying on things like, I don't know, muscles and energy from food, and I don't know, maybe even someone's permission to do things. So our power isn't from, like, we don't really have substantial power in ourselves then. And this is because we are finite created beings. So because God is not a finite created being, then his power would be from himself. Like, he is the source of his own power. He acts out of his own nature, sort of. That's a weird way of phrasing it. So if his own nature is power, then how much power would that be? Like, I don't know. Anyone want to talk about 3? Like, how powerful is God? Based on him not being a finite created being. Yeah.
Maximal.
So wanted to get you guys.
Powerful, because then you've got a definition of powerful in your head.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Our concept of power doesn't really, like, we don't have a concept of infinitely powerful being. So I think you're absolutely right to say he's beyond what we mean by powerful. And this is exactly why we speak analogically. If he was what we mean by powerful, but just in a really high degree, then we would be able to speak univocally. But if he is beyond what we mean by power, then that just doesn't hold. So this is why we speak that way. So I'm going to talk about omnipresence. This one, big disclaimer, it's not actually an attribute. Any guesses why, based on what I said at the beginning? Anyone remember? Okay, going once, going twice. All right. So attributes are intrinsic characteristics of God. They have to do with his own being. Now, omnipresence means, all right, well, God's presence has no limits. He is at every point in space, different from in every point in space. So this depends on there being space. Makes sense? So similarly to God being a creator isn't an attribute, but rather sort of an accidental property. That doesn't mean a mistake, just a property that he could have not had. Similarly to that, omnipresence is an attribute that he could have not had if there was no such thing as space. So this means God is not a spatial being. I mentioned here, this is an extrinsic property because it's related to something outside, well, outside is a weird word. It's related to something other than God, meaning space. Anyone want to read Psalm 137 here?
Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, behold, you are there. If I take the wings of the dawn, if I dwell in the remotest part of the sea, even there your hand will lead me and your right hand will lay hold of me.
All right. Thank you. Guys, have anything to say about this? Any thoughts? Yeah. No. Going once, going twice. This is another thing that's derived from simplicity. And the reason for this is God is not made of parts, so you can't exactly partition God into this region of space or that region of space. In fact, you can't even say that he is a spatial being at all because he isn't composed of parts. Something that is spatial, it like anything material, has parts to it, like, I don't know, we're made of atoms, or space is made of, I don't know, weird fluctuations in quantum mechanical things that I don't understand. And none of those apply to things that aren't sort of composed. We're getting close to the end here. Oh boy, maybe not that close to the end. So, how about omniscience? Another incommunicable attribute, right? So, I already talked about God's knowledge analogically, so I'm not going to have you guys do that again. So, if God is the creator of all things and he sustains all things actively, then do you think it follows that he knows all things? Yes, no? Anyone want to challenge that? Okay. So suppose there was something that he didn't know. That would mean that he is actively sustaining this thing and was not aware of it. Seems weird to me. It also would imply that there was something whose source was not from God, which is not the case if God is the creator of all things. So I had that here, but we did that before, so I'm not going to do that. Anyone want to read Job?
Do you know how the clouds hang poised? Those wonders of him who is perfect in knowledge.
Candy? I don't know.
Yeah,
Okay, maybe I'll just put this away. How about Hebrews?
And there is no creature hidden from his sight, but all things are open and laid bare to the eyes of him with whom we have to do.
Awesome. That translation was a little weird. One I heard before said, to whom we are accountable. I don't know. Whatever. It's all good. But we see all things are open and laid bare to him. Like nothing is hidden from his sight. It kind of goes well with omnipresence. Here's a fun one. Devin's going to handle this next week. Be sure to tune in next time, guys. So this is something that we don't really come to philosophically. Like, how would we have known that God is a tripersonal being? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here because I want Devin to do all of this, so I don't have to. But, so what we mean is not that God is three beings or that all three of these persons are the same being. Does anyone want to give like sort of a definition on what the Trinity is? Kurt, you want a shot at it? I can call on him because he was our vice president at York Tech.
Well, that God is a Trinity, as I understand it, means that he is three distinct persons in one being.
Okay, so we aren't saying there's three beings, or we aren't saying that they're all the same person. That's good. Now, one way that it was phrased in, was it the Athanasian Creed? I don't know. They would say three distinct persons participate fully in the divine nature, whatever that means. But if God's nature is being, as simplicity implies, then all three persons are united in one being. Here we have Matthew 3:16-17, where all three persons are visible. After being baptized, Jesus came up immediately from the water, and behold, the heavens were opened, and he saw the Spirit of God descending as a dove, lighting on him. And behold, a voice out of the heavens said, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." Then Isaiah 45 says, "Look to me and be saved, all you ends of the earth, for I am God and there is no other." So if you have three divine persons here, and there is only one God, then the Trinity must follow. So here's God's love. This is a big one. Anyone want to read the chapter section from 1 John?
He who does not love does not know God, for God is love. And this the love of God was manifested toward us, that God has sent his only begotten Son into the world, that we might live through him. And this is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins.
I love this one, man, don't you? It's a great one. It's awesome. I mean, I think that's pretty cool. And how about John 15?
As the Father loved me, I also have loved you. Abide in my love.
As the Father has loved Jesus? Like, dude. You love me like you love Jesus? I think it's pretty crazy. I mean, that's just awesome. So this is another thing that comes from the attribute of perfection. God has all perfections, and we would say that love is one of those. Another thing we would say is God is omnibenevolent, or all-loving. So what we mean is God desires the good of all creatures. Is that right? I don't know, maybe. So, wait a minute, what do you think this guy means? What do you think this guy means? Sorry. Guys, what do you guys think this means? It's a pretty big one, isn't it? So, here's an objection that people will bring up. If God loves everyone, then why doesn't everyone go to heaven?
That's a good question.
That's why I'm asking you guys with all your collective brain power.
Because not everyone loves God.
Yeah. So, tell me more. Cody?
He means acting as your father. I love you and I want you to do these certain things, but because I love you, I'm going to let you have your free will and do as you wish. And even though I continue to love you, you can choose whether or not to love me in return. If you want to spend eternity away from me, you can. Or if you choose to turn around and come back to me and love me in return, you can spend eternity with me if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, that's good. God's love for someone doesn't necessarily entail that he will do something for them if he also gives them a choice. Now, who was it who said the gates of hell are locked from the inside? Remember that, Devin? Thought so. Yeah. One thing C.S. Lewis also said is, man, you want all these people who reject God to go to heaven? They'd be the most miserable people there. They reject God, but wonder why they don't get to be with him for eternity. But here's the crazy thing. God loves those people who reject him. He doesn't love them any less because he punishes them. Instead, he satisfies the demands of justice even on those he loves, which he says in Ezekiel, I do not take pleasure that the wicked should perish, but rather they should turn from their ways and repent. So we do see something that he has, in some sense, he wills for people to have repentance. And that's where this love comes in. So, I'm going to move on here.
Because often we entail, I mean, like with love, like that you would like put love over justice or something like that. But because we like add on to love, like that also means that you won't be punished.
We're going to get there. Got another question for you guys. All right, so I'm going to talk about mercy a little bit. I said maybe up there because a lot of people will think, well, maybe it's an act or maybe it's an attribute. I don't know which. So maybe. So this is a result of God's goodness and love. He loves people, so he makes a way for them to be saved from condemnation. Or God acts compassionately towards man. This isn't the same as saying God has compassion, because God in the divine nature doesn't suffer with us, as that word implies. He absolutely does in the human nature, which is why the incarnation is so wonderful. But I say God acts compassionately because his acts are consistent with what we consider to be compassion. Anyone want to read Psalms 13 or Jonah 4:2?
But I have trusted in your loving kindness. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me.
Yeah. Anyone for Jonah?
He prayed to the Lord and said, Please, the Lord, was not this what I said while I was still in my own country? Therefore, in order to forestall this, I fled to Tarshish, for I knew you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abundant in loving kindness, and one who relents concerning calamity.
So Ninevites were nasty people. Jonah thought they were nasty people. Jonah didn't want the Ninevites to be saved. He wanted them to burn in hell. So he decides, man, I don't want to share God's culture. Well, he wouldn't have called it the gospel. I don't want to teach them to repent. I'd rather just jump off the ship. So he does. And then God teaches him a lesson about mercy. Because he knew this. He knew that if he goes to preach God's word there, God will save them. He had promised to do so to Jonah. Like he said, go to these people and bring them to repentance. So we're going to go to the next one here, and we're going to come back to this. So here's where we're going to stop, because we're getting close to time. Now, God's justice, it kind of means that, well, God loves goodness and hates evil. So, anyone want to read Zephaniah and then 1 John?
The Lord is righteous within her.
That's within Zion, I think.
Okay.
Or the church.
He will do no injustice. Every morning he brings his justice to light. He does not fail.
And 1 John. This is the message that we have heard it from him and announced to you, that God is light and in him is no darkness at all. So God's justice means that he's not going to just let evil be. He hates evil. He wants to destroy evil, which is pretty great. It'd be great if there was no more evil. So some people will make the objection, his justice and his mercy are incompatible. If he administers justice, then he's not showing mercy. And if he shows mercy, then, well, he isn't administering justice. Now, someone might say, well, he shows mercy to some people, so he's demonstrating that attribute there, but then he does the other for justice, so he shows different attributes to different people. It's true that God reveals different attributes to different people through his different actions. I think that's fairly straightforward. But what these people would say is, well, no, these attributes themselves are in conflict with each other. One attribute is telling God to do one thing, the other is telling God to do another. It's not exactly how God acts. But how would you guys respond to this? What do you guys think? It puts this dilemma where God is either ignoring sin or not showing compassion.
Isn't that like where Jesus is supposed to solve that problem?
So, yeah, tell us about that.
The killing of the animals.
What?
Like sacrificing
Oh, yeah.
of animals.
Right. So, this is a contradiction that I think Christianity is uniquely equipped to deal with. I don't know of any other religion that could withstand this objection. Because in Christianity alone, do we have a God who decides to satisfy justice or to show mercy without sacrificing justice. So if you're a Muslim and you do enough good works, God will let you, or Allah will let you into paradise. But there is no sacrifice for your sin, no punishment for your sin. Essentially, it's almost like you've gotten away with it. Nothing paid for that. Yeah.
I remember in my study of Islam, one thing I noticed with Allah, it was saying that Allah has already said and decided these people are going to be condemned, these people are not. I know who's going to follow me, I know who's not, because I've already chosen those who are going to follow me and chosen those who are not. And I myself am going to fill hell and death and Sheol with the ones I've chosen, as many as I please. And the way he balances it is it's arbitrary, because I can do the exact same things that this other guy next to me can do, but if he believes in Allah and I don't, then, or if he kills himself as a martyr for Islam, it doesn't matter how many infidels he murdered in his life. If he did it for that reason, he could murder 1 million people and it would be counted to him as righteousness, versus I murder 1 million people simply because I want to, and it would be counted to me as sin, and I could be condemned and he could be received for it.
Man, that's crazy. So here is Yeah, praising murder is kind of crazy. Anyway, here's the problem with this. Is justice ever satisfied in the people who commit sin but then are let into paradise because they also did good works? Yeah, no, maybe. Show of hands for yes.
Are you talking about Christianity?
I'm talking about Islam. So, yeah, essentially that sin is just, I don't know. But with Christianity, it says that our sin was put to death in Jesus. I should have put this verse up here. Can I see my Bible? Up here. I'm going to pull up Isaiah 53 because I think this is a really good illustration for that. So it says, okay. So speaking of Jesus here, he was taken from prison and from judgment, and who will declare his generation? For he was cut off from the land of the living, for the transgressions of my people he was stricken. And they made his grave with the wicked, but with the rich at his death, because he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it pleased the Lord to bruise him, and he has put him to grief. When you shall make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. So here we see God is satisfying justice on Jesus. He says he was pleased to bruise Jesus. I mean, the thought that, I don't know, you guys know that feeling when, I don't know, someone gets, who was the guy who did the shootings in Aurora? Yeah, remember that story? Yeah. So that guy gets put in prison. I mean, you feel some sort of satisfaction, like justice has been done. This man who did this awful thing is no longer able to hurt people, and he's being punished for it. There's some retribution there, and it seems like God has a similar sort of satisfaction with justice being done to Jesus. So here he has satisfied justice so that he can show mercy on the people who he has, or on the people who believe in him. Psalm 32 says, "Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord does not impute iniquity." So to impute iniquity means to charge someone with guilt for sin. So it's like Jesus is charged for our guilt for sin, so that justice is satisfied and God can show us mercy. I think it's incredible. And like I said before, Christianity has a very unique answer to this issue. And I think that's just another testimony for the truth of Christianity. If there is a God, and it's going to be a God who is both merciful and just, because God has all perfections, Christianity uniquely can satisfy both of these. So, come to the end of this. If you guys have any questions, I'd like to stick around and just answer those. Otherwise, you're free to go. Check out some of the